These videos take a long time to record and edit. It would mean a lot to me if you could leave a like and subscribe. If you enjoy this video, leave a comment about your favorite part. It will get pinned and hearted. Now let's get into the story. Sakura was lying on her bed looking absently at the ceiling. Her fingers were interwoven over her stomach. It grumbled with months of starvation. It was another less than stellar day after a mission. 1. Team 7 got a mission. 2. An enemy ninja popped up. 3. Naruto and Sasuke handled it while Sakura stood idle in a corner somewhere. 4. Kakashi congratulated them without sparing her a glance. 5. The mission is completed and they all go home. It was all so draining. The vast difference in power dynamics of her team had only grown since the wave mission, and Sakura just knew that she would never be able to catch up to them. Always cursed to be the one left behind. Sakura rolled over to her side. She looked around her room. It was just so childish. Stuffed bears, impractical girly clothes that did nothing to help her during missions, and overwhelming amounts of pink. She sighed to herself. There was no way in hell she was fit to be a ninja, and she was too stubborn to admit it to herself for so long. Even her infatuation with Sasuke was fading. She only continued the act at this point to keep a sense of normalcy. Sakura guessed that this all started with her and Ino's rivalry. Ino had mentioned one day in passing the year before that she was slimming down nicely. The ludicrous idea of two 11-year-old girls being on a diet did nothing to deter them, especially the competitive Sakura, who wanted nothing more than to prove that she could succeed at something. Much to Ino's ignorance, Sakura had continued this competition and it was affecting her greatly. For the first 6 months, no changes were present in her body. Sakura was untrained, ill-informed, and lacked the discipline to eat a specialized meal plan for more than a day. It was frustrating, and it was something that she reluctantly let Ino win. The diet was forgotten for a while until she finally started Team 7. While she rejoiced being on a team with Sasuke at first, she was beginning to realize how detrimental he was to her self-esteem and confidence. It would be hard for anyone to integrate into a team with the son of the 4th Hokage and the esteemed Uchiha clan. Others might have fared better than her though. She was just an insecure girl with no familial affiliation with ninjas or outstanding skills. She was a brilliant girl, but susceptible to following those she thought better than her. Sakura balled her fists together until her nails dug into her skin until she drew blood. She watched it drip down her hand until it dropped to the floor. Tears collected in her eyes. She wiped at them furiously, but that didn't stop the pathetic whimpers she let out. She thought it was a cruel joke to have put her on a team like this. She didn't stand a chance at becoming a ninja. Kakashi, as acclaimed as he was in the ninja world, was far from teacher material, and he knew it. Sakura hated seeing the way he was so dismissive of them, especially her. It was obvious he didn't expect much of her, and the only time she would be trained was if she happened to be in the same vicinity as the rest of her team. Never one-on-one as her teammates got to do. He noticed she was smart but wrote her off as some lovesick girl with no future. Even if it was true, she felt that there was still no reason to neglect teaching her, since that was his job now, no matter how much he obviously hated doing it. The most he ever asked her to do was intervene when Naruto and Sasuke started arguing. She hadn't had the energy to do it lately, and her resentment towards Kakashi was growing every day. The mission to Waves was the beginning of the end for her. He noted her proficiency in chakra control, but only as a sexist ploy to motivate Naruto and Sasuke's training. Once that exercise was over, he made no move to give her something else to occupy her time, and she ended up back at the resident's house to cook. It hadn't bothered her at the time, but just being alone with her thoughts for a moment, thinking about all the ways he failed her, made her stomach drop. It didn't make it any better that Sasuke's tongue cut like a knife. He'd find any and every way to belittle her. She took his comments as constructive criticism, but no matter how much she tried to train on her own, he was just relentless. Standing back and finally looking at the boy she told herself she loved was hard. All those things she'd idolized in him before were now markers of his insensitivity. She guessed she couldn't blame him though. Living in your more successful, prodigal older brother's shadow had to be hard, especially with pressure from his family and high expectations from outsiders. Naruto, with more time spent around him, was actually lovably annoying. He didn't bother her as much when she slowly stopped idolizing Sasuke, but he could definitely work on his volume. His father is the 4th Hokage and known across the land for his immense power and wit. He was currently under his father's tutelage. It didn't hurt that his mother was a member of the Uzumaki clan, known for immense chakra reserves and great sealing skills. He was destined to be great, and she now believed that he would be. However, even with all his great assets, he still did nothing to boost Sakura's self-worth. Sakura was sure that his love for her didn't extend past his rivalry with Sasuke. She was just another conquest in his pursuit to best Sasuke. Although Sakura could now see them slowly becoming great friends, she wished that he would stop babying her. If Sasuke completely denied of her any ninja skill, and Kakashi ignored her in favor of his more powerful students, Then Naruto hid his disdain for her weakness by his incessant need to coddle her. Even when Sakura tried to get involved in a fight, he was always there to swoop in front of her and save the day. It was hard to be mad with him because she was such a terrible ninja and he had a heart of gold. But she just sometimes wished that he believed in her enough to let her handle herself. This slow realization of the depth of her inadequacies had led her into a terrible bout of depression. Her terrible dieting habits from her rivalry with Ino suddenly turned into a beacon of discipline. Since being on the team, she had started stress eating more than usual. Even her mother had made a remark about her weight gain. After an offhand comment made by Ino after a mission, Sakura had gone into overdrive. She justified it to continue. She was gaining weight, and that wouldn't help her anymore since she was already such a deadweight to her team. She reasoned that losing weight would help her team carry her when they inevitably had to save her on a mission. The first few weeks were the hardest. It was hard to walk. Her head hurt all the time, and she was often dizzy. They voiced their concerns, but she always dismissed them, not like they really care anyway. She started by cutting out snacks from her diet. She didn't realize how many she ate until she started going through sugar withdrawals in the first week. Once she got past that plateau, she cut out carbs. She found herself perpetually hungry and had to force herself to stay in her room to avoid getting more food. From then on, she cut out salty foods, then meats, then fats, until she realized that if she could do without all of that, then she didn't need to eat anything at all. It was a fun game to play. Seeing how far she could go before she got sick was well documented in her diaries. Being able to go back to read how far she'd come in the past 6 months was extremely gratifying. But she just couldn't make herself happier. No matter how much weight she lost, it was never enough. There were times where her teammates and peers seemed to be catching on, and trying to keep up with all her lies was exhausting. Take this afternoon for example. It was another mission of busy work finding the cat of a merchant's wife. The entire ordeal was wrapped up rather quickly, and it was lunchtime when they reported back to the Hokage. Just like countless times before, Naruto had asked her if she wanted to eat at Ikaraku's ramen shop. She fixed her mouth to decline when Kakashi, for the first time in a long while, decided to act like a teacher and offered to pay for everyone's meals. Naruto whooped with joy and Sasuke made a slight head nod in agreement. They all turned and looked at her expectantly. She remembered the way she pulled at her clothes nervously. Naruto started dragging her away before she could even answer. When they made it to Ikaraku, Sakura felt like her heart would burst out of her chest. It had been a while since she'd eaten in front of anybody, much less her teammates, and her anxiety was through the roof. The delicious aroma filled her nostrils and she was finding it harder and harder to resist temptation. She detached her chopsticks and fussed around with her food a little. When she finally took her first bite, there was no denying the hunger plaguing her stomach. Small bites wouldn't cut it. She'd almost fainted 3 times that morning during the mission, and was running on 1 granola for the past 6 hours. She didn't realize how fast she'd been eating until Naruto made a comment. "Whoa, Sakura-chan, I didn't know you liked ramen so much." It was such an innocent statement. She knew the boy didn't mean it like that. He never did. But when she looked into her empty bowl with no recollection of eating besides the lingering taste in her mouth, she knew she had to leave. She dismissed herself with an excuse about her parents being upset about her spoiling her appetite with ramen and left. She took winding paths and alleyways that would do their best to keep her hidden and ran home. Her vision was blurred from all the crying. She didn't know how she made it home with her inability to see other than muscle memory. Sakura went up to her room, slammed the door, and entered the small bathroom connected to her bedroom. She lifted the toilet seat up, pushed her fingers down her throat, and puked until she felt her stomach completely empty. She flushed the toilet without looking and laid on the floor for an hour before she heard her parents open the front door and call out to her. Sakura cleaned herself up and rushed downstairs to help her parents with the new furniture and decorations for the house. It didn't take long for a light-hearted conversation about furniture to turn into another one of her mother's rants in opposition to Sakura's ninja status. "I just don't understand why you're so adamant about being a ninja. I remember you coming home from school talking about gossip with Ino and that Uchiha boy. Never ninja skills. I think you're doing it to spite me at this point." Sakura rolled her eyes. Conversations between her and her parents had become tense and strained since starting her ninja career. Her mother was very vocal about her disapproval while her father simply ignored the conversation altogether. On some nights, his indifference hurt worse than a knife. "I want to be a ninja. It's something I like to do. Honey, you're not very good at it. I don't understand why you can't do something more low risk that matches your skills." her mother remarked in her patronizing maternalistic tone. It was a tone she had been taking more frequently. It grated on Sakura's ears. I am good. One of the missions my team and I went on even had a bridge named after us. How much of that honor was as a result of what you did on the battlefield? The room went silent. Her father could sense the tension in the room and tried to quell it before it escalated. Come on, both of you. Let's just put these things away so we can get ready for dinner. What does it matter? I'm a part of the team. Oh honey, I'm not trying to be the bad guy here or anything. But your father and I, we know your skill set. Maybe if you were on a different team your shortcomings wouldn't be so glaring. But those boys are powerhouses and you'll just end up getting in their way. Just quit while you're ahead and stay here with me. Okay, Sakura stopped breathing. No matter how true it was, she didn't want to hear it, especially not from her mother. This had to be the ultimate betrayal. Sakura started shaking with rage. Her father walked over and laid a hand on her back. Let's stop this now. It's only going to get worse. You don't even know me. Her mother rolled her eyes, used to the outburst. Ugh, not this again. Her mother said with a tone of dismissal. Not everyone's against you just because they're being realistic. I'm only telling you this to spare your feelings. Sakura's shakes of rage turned into sobs. Before she could stop herself, the tears poured out and she was blubbering like a baby. I hate you. I flipping hate you. Her mother looked taken aback. Sakura could feel her father jacking her up from behind and shaking her. That's enough. Apologize to your mother and go to your room. Sakura ran straight up the stairs and slammed her room door shut. She could hear her parents' protests from downstairs, but she didn't care. She was just so sick of everyone telling her she was useless without even giving her a fair chance to prove herself. This was how she found herself on her bed moping. She looked over at the clock. It was almost midnight and her parents were still downstairs just talking. They'd been at the dinner table for hours just rambling about the most mundane topics. However, Sakura's ears perked up when her mother started talking about her. I just don't know what to do with that girl. She can be so stubborn sometimes. That's where you two are alike. You never back down from a fight even when you're wrong. Her father quipped. Sakura heard them laugh with a joy she hadn't heard in months. Please, I'm not that bad. Even I know when to quit. She heard her mother reply. Sakura could feel a weight in her stomach drop. While it's obvious you won't be able to convince her that this dream she has of being a ninja isn't realistic, so just let her figure that out herself and embarrass us in the process. I don't think so. Her mother comments with a laugh. It's a pipe dream and you know it, dear. She can be mad at me now, but she'll realize I was right later. Just let her indulge herself now. Maybe she'll realize she doesn't have the chops in a few more months, and then we won't have to worry about this anymore. Her father reasoned. I hope you're right. A small laugh ensued between the two, ends the conversation. Sakura gets up and stands by the door with half a mind to let them know that she heard what they said and wouldn't be changing her mind. That she could only stand at the door with tears in her eyes and the knowledge deep down in her heart that they were right. Sakura slipped into her sandals and headed out the door. She wore a plain, white, flowy dress with a large straw hat embroidered with a flower. Team 7 agreed to do a training session today, but Sakura had no intention of going. Not like they meant to include me anyway. She was heading towards the Hawkage Tower. It was time to be realistic. She was going to do the mature thing and formally quit the team. Last night was hard to swallow. Coming to terms with being a deadweight would be hard on anyone, especially a 12-year-old girl with no support system. She greeted the door guards and entered the building. A few other employees greeted her on her way to the Hawkage's office and she returned their kindness. Once she finally reached the Hawkage's office, she was disappointed, yet relieved to see an unknown, busty blonde woman sitting on the desk. She was disappointed because she wanted to speak to the fourth directly, but relieved that she didn't because her anxiety was shooting through the roof just working up the nerve to talk to him. She stood at the entrance with a meek look. It took a few moments for the mysterious woman to look up from a book she was reading and notice her. Hello, the blonde woman greeted. How may I help you? She asked as she set her book down. The blonde woman rose from her place on the desk and moved closer towards Sakura. Sakura could feel her chest constrict with worry. Hi, I'm here to resign from my team. The words fell unnaturally from her mouth. Sakura's voice cracked on the last few words and she knew this was a decision she would come to regret. I have to do this for everyone's benefit. I'm more of a dead last than Naruto will ever be. The blonde woman frowned. She could see the young girl's inner turmoil. It was obvious that this was a hard decision for her to come to and there was nothing the woman could do to comfort her. That's a very permanent decision, the woman reasoned. Sakura shrugged. It's for the best. I'm hardly a ninja anyhow. The blonde woman observed the girl's sullen expression. It was such a hard reality to face for women in the ninja world. A male-dominated field where men made up the majority of teams was an unfair playing field. Even if they had a female teammate, Girls were constantly cast to the side as to not outshine their male counterparts' achievements. The woman didn't want to think of the many women and girls just like the pink-haired girl who had to come to this same decision before. The woman started shuffling through a filing cabinet until she found the form the young girl was looking for. "Just fill this out and I'll give this to Minato-san for you." Sakura took the form from the woman's hand and scribbled her career away in a matter of 5 minutes. She wanted to cry, but there was no time for weakness. She scrawled her last signature and held herself together to hand it back to the blonde woman. "Sakura, huh?" The blonde woman read her name out loud unconsciously. Sakura stood before her fidgeting with her hands. The woman looked up from her paper and smiled. "That's all for now. Come back here tomorrow at the same time. We'll also have to get your sensei's final word on this." "Don't worry, he'll agree," Sakura said with mirth coating her words. "See you tomorrow, I guess." The blonde woman waves the young girl away. Sakura walked out the doors of the Hokage office, barely able to hold herself off from sobbing. The blonde woman sat in a rolling chair with her feet propped up on the Hokage's desk. She was reading over Sakura's file. Other than her intelligence, noted chakra control, and potential for genjutsu, there was nothing outstanding about her profile. It had to be a joke for the third to even pair her with such an infamous duo. Was he deliberately sabotaging her career? She found it hard to disagree with the girl's previous self-deprecating statements, but she could work with potential. It was obvious that the girl's self-esteem was at an all-time low, and she needed a quick pick-me-up. If Sakura came back tomorrow, the blonde woman would be able to give her just that. The blonde woman could feel the familiar chakra signatures of the fourth Hokage, Kakashi, and another extremely talented older ninja approaching the office. The blonde woman made haste to put away the girl's files and tucked her resignation letter into her bra. The trio walked in the middle of a conversation, lighthearted from what she could tell. "Ah, Tsunade-sama, how nice to have you here. What brings you into town?" The fourth Hokage, Minato, greeted Tsunade with a smile and a warm hug. Tsunade reciprocated with a fierce hug and a smile that outshined his. "You've never greeted me that nicely." Tsunade and were peers. "Jiraiya." The older man pouted. Tsunade rolled her eyes and made her way back around the desk and sat in the rolling chair. "Please spare me the theatrics. No one would want to greet a degenerate like you warmly." The room erupted in hearty laughter. Minato made his way around the desk to stand next to Tsunade. Jiraiya and Kakashi leaned against the front of it. "And to answer you, Minato, I'm here because of the attack at the Chunin exams." "You're very calm for a man who was almost assassinated." Minato waved his hand dismissively. "It comes with the job. Besides, they were after Sarutobi-sama more so than me." Tsunade shook her head. Jiraiya laughed loudly and clapped his hand on Minato's shoulder. "Don't be so modest, boy. You're a force of your own. I'm sure Sand was trying to take you out, too." "How comforting." Kakashi deadpans. Tsunade held back a chuckle with the back of her hand covering her mouth. Jiraiya scowled at him. Kakashi slid his book into one of the pockets of his Jounin vest and cleared his throat. "Well, what'll it be, Jiraiya? Will you be taking Naruto off my hands to formally train him?" Tsunade's eyes widened in shock. She had no idea her old teammate was planning on mentoring someone at his old age. It seemed impractical to a woman like her who was so used to moving on her own time. "Oh, you should, Jiraiya-sensei. It'll be like me and you." Jiraiya scratched his head apprehensively. Training the loudmouthed brat was not on his schedule. "I don't know. I think Kakashi's doing a pretty good job." "No, it's not the same. He needs a more concentrated teaching method. I have 3 kids to drill basic ninja stuff into. It's a given that I won't be able to include everyone's separate skill sets." "No kidding," Tsunade thought to herself. "Please, sensei, do it for me." Minato pleaded with Jiraiya. Jiraiya looked away knowing he was going to cave. "Ah, you always know how to convince me, don't you, kid?" Tsunade could see that the 3 men had reached an agreement. Minato was moving things around in his filing cabinets when Tsunade saw a document highlighted in red. She pulled it out much to Minato's chagrin and read it. The information was alarming, but possibly beneficial to all parties involved. "Have you read this?" Tsunade asked while holding the paper out of Minato's reach. "Some of it." Minato struggled to get it out of Tsunade's hand. "I haven't had the time to read it thoroughly." Tsunade rose from the swivel chair and walked to the other side of the room with the paper in hand. As a way to ease tension between all ninja nations after Sand's attack on the Leaf, the villages are considering a peace treaty via creating international teams of young genin. Any genin can apply to be part of this exchange program, and higher-ranking ninja from any region can apply to be a sensei. Humagakure has the housing infrastructure needed to house potential applicants. "Thank you for that summary." Minato replies exasperatedly. "Sounds good to me. Why are you dragging your feet on it?" Tsunade inquired. Minato sighed in defeat. I'm not dragging my feet. I just have a lot of other paperwork to do before I get to that. Well, now since I've read it for you, you can agree to it now, right guys? Kakashi made a noise of approval while Jiraiya grinned with pride. I told you she'd be a good candidate for Hokage, didn't I? Minato chuckled in agreement. Tsunade rolled her eyes and flicked Jiraiya upside the head. Don't volunteer my time, you bozo. Always pushing your work off onto me. I'm sure he asked you first. Jiraiya rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Tsunade placed the document on the Hokage's table and slid it closer to Minato. He took it with a relieved sigh. So you'll be signing off on it. Minato nodded wearily. Tsunade released a megawatt smile. There's hope for you yet, Sakura. I'll have your first applicant here tomorrow morning. Tsunade left in a whirlwind of happy delusion. The three males watched her leave in a confused shock. Sakura had never felt more useless in her life. The walk back home was brutal. Everything felt so surreal. Time seemed to slow down. There was nothing more she wanted to do than cry out. In anger, despair, desperation, or defeat. She didn't know, but she needed to scream. With her final scribble, she had permanently ended any semblance of a ninja career she had ever believed she would be able to have. Coming back tomorrow would just be another knife in the wound. She saw Naruto and Sasuke hanging out with the rest of the Rookie 9 and Team Gaia at Ikaraku's and felt like a rock was placed onto her chest. She wanted to at least give them a proper goodbye, but just the memory of what she had done brought her to tears. When she finally got home, her parents steered clear of her. It was obvious she was in no better mood than last night, and judging by the sobs emitting from her room, she wouldn't be better anytime soon. Sakura laid sprawled out across her bed and mashed her face into one of her sickeningly cute plush pillows. No matter how muffled her cries, she was sure the entire neighborhood could hear her mourning at this point. All of a sudden, Sakura heard a knock at her door. She bolted up and rubbed at her tear-stained cheeks. Sakura, it was her mother's voice. The slow creaking of the door opening signaled her hesitance. Last night was really tense and it was obvious it added on to whatever her daughter was feeling right now. Sakura sat up in her bed in a hunched style as she watched her mother enter the room with a plate of rice balls. The delicious aroma hit her nose and she had to fight the creeping feelings she would have to face later about eating a full meal. She was in a delicate state and stress eating was all she could do at this point. I brought you some food, dear. Sakura's mother placed the food down on her daughter's nightstand. She made a move to reach out to cup Sakura's face, but her daughter jerked away bitterly. Her mother sighed in exasperation and slowly backed away. You should eat, dear. That always makes you feel better. Sakura waited until her mother was completely out of the room before she got up to lock the door. She laid back down on her bed and grabbed one of the 3 rice balls. She stuffed her face with a vigor she hadn't allowed herself to in months. Every morsel was chewed with enthusiasm, and before she knew it, all 3 rice balls were gone. As soon as she swallowed the last piece, regret sunk into her. All those feelings she'd tried to eat away came bubbling up to the surface, and she wanted nothing more than to puke all her feelings away metaphorically and literally. Every terrible memory she could muster popped into her head and another round of sobs racked her body. I wish I was normal, or at least pretty. Something to make up for having no talent would be nice. Triggered beyond belief, Sakura sat up and rummaged through her dresser drawers. Underneath a mountain of underwear was an old, rusty kunai that she kept for special purposes. She was about to do something she'd tried to forget about for over a year. Sakura walked into the adjacent bathroom, kunai in hand, and looked into the mirror. She was rail thin, with blotchy skin, and an underdeveloped body that everyone felt the need to comment on. If people weren't preoccupied with her lack of a chest, then it was about her forehead. If it wasn't about her forehead, then it was her lack of skill in battle. It was a never-ending nightmare of her ineptness. She was tired of pretending to be okay. She steadied the kunai above her wrist. She wasn't this reckless the last time she did it. She still had the scar on her thigh from her last breakdown, but it was faded and she liked to think of it as a distant memory. She'd done it after losing her diet competition with Ino. It wasn't just that she had lost to the girl. It showed her weaknesses in every other aspect in her life and she hated it. It didn't make it any better that her mom just had to make a snide comment that night either. Sakura ran the kunai blade across her wrist. It hurt like a bitch, but it was a nice release and she loved watching the blood trickle. Just knowing she could play with her life like this exhilarated her, and she always wanted to go further to test the limits. Sakura continued this for a few more cuts before her sink became stained with blood. She washed her wrist off, disinfected both her sink and wrist, and wrapped herself in some spare gauze she'd taken from her parents' bathroom. She looked into the mirror once again in defeat. I'd better get used to this. There'll be a lot more nights like this since I'll be with mom and dad more often. Mom and dad more often. Mom and dad more often. Mom